Berry Oakley's story, intertwined with the so-called Allman curse, unfolds in the rebellious tapestry of late 1960s and early 1970s America. Vietnam protests burned through the streets. Youth culture was in the throes of a societal upheaval, and rock music had cracked open a Pandora's box of counterculture ideals. It was the era of Woodstock, of dusty denim jackets, of a bristling tension between generations. In the South particularly, a new kind of musical hybrid was taking shape, somewhere between the blues clubs of Chicago, the R&B joints of Memphis, and the country twang of Nashville. Bands in Georgia and Florida were fusing these influences into something as raw and honest as the humid nights they lived through. The Allman Brothers Band would come to define this new wave of Southern rock, weaving jam band improvisations with soulful lyrics that spoke to heartbreak, salvation, and the fleeting nature of life on the road. But that sense of freedom came with a cost. Musicians carried on their shoulders the weight of a rapidly changing America, the burden of delivering nightly transcendence to crowds hungry for escape, and the hidden anxieties that can lurk backstage, fueled by exhaustion drugs and the creeping sense that storms were gathering just beyond the stage lights. Berry Oakley was born Raymond Berry Oakley III on April 4, 1948, in Chicago. His father, a United States Army officer, had been killed in action in World War II before Berry even got a chance to know him. Many believe that losing a father he never met gave Berry an unusual depth from a young age, a quiet seriousness that coexisted with a brilliant flash of humor whenever he felt comfortable. Raised primarily by his mother, he developed an early fascination with music that cut across genres: doo-wop, church gospel, and especially the electric blues. As he came of age, he explored the winding corridors of Chicago's clubs, soaking up the sounds of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, all the while experimenting with a simple bass guitar he got his hands on as a teenager. Berry's mother noticed that he had a unique sense of timing. Even before he could describe chord structures, Berry instinctively knew when to push forward or hold back, weaving melodic lines that felt more like a lead instrument than a rhythmic anchor. By the mid-1960s, as rock music thundered through the nation, Berry moved to Florida, where he crossed paths with several musicians chasing the same dream. He bumped into Duane Allman, an intense, visionary slide guitar player with an otherworldly gift for bending notes until they cried out like wounded angels. Duane's younger brother, Greg, was an emotive singer and keyboardist in his own right, still discovering the full depth of his vocal soul. Together, these men, along with Dickie Betts, Butch Trucks, and J-Mo, would form the Allman Brothers Band in 1969, forging an identity that melded Berry's melodic bass lines with dual guitar leads and a drum section that shook the rafters. From day one, Berry's presence was pivotal. More than just the bassist, he was a quiet anchor who not only locked down the low end, but also engaged the twin guitars in a kind of musical ballet. Anyone who saw their early club shows would talk about Berry with awe. There was a moment in each performance, usually during a jam in Whipping Post or in memory of Elizabeth Reed, where Berry's bass would step forward, dancing around Duane and Dickie's guitar phrases, making the entire arrangement feel like a living, breathing organism. In the nascent Southern rock scene of 1969, the band was forging a path distinct from the psychedelic rock dominating the West Coast or the polished pop of the mainstream. They jammed endlessly, sometimes playing 3 sets a night, building an almost telepathic sense of unity. Berry, tall and lean with a slight mustache framing his youthful face, exuded a calm that contrasted with Duane's high-voltage energy. Fans in sweaty clubs would see Duane, eyes closed, lost in the swirl of his slide guitar, while Berry stood not far away coaxing nuances from his bass. After those shows, they'd often pile into ragged vans for long drives to the next gig, living on diner coffee and dusty cigarettes. Money was scarce. Tension flared occasionally, but the music held them together like a protective force field. In 1970, they released their self-titled debut album. Though sales were modest, critics and a growing base of devoted fans recognized something special. There was an urgency and authenticity in the Allman Brothers Band sound, driven by Berry's rhythmic foundation. He wasn't content to merely provide root notes. He treated the bass as a melodic narrative tool, rising and falling with the guitars, playing with the fluidity of a jazz musician in a rock context. Sometimes after a gig, younger players would approach him wide-eyed and ask how he managed those intricate runs without overshadowing the other instruments. He'd grin shyly and shrug, offering that he just followed what he felt in the moment. In interviews, his bandmates credited Berry with having an almost telekinetic awareness of where the music needed to go. Their second album, Idlewild South, expanded their range. Greg's songwriting matured. Dickie began to step into the spotlight as both guitarist and singer, and Duane's session work with the likes of Aretha Franklin and Eric Clapton honed his already remarkable skills. But in the midst of all that, Berry's playing remained the subtle glue. The band holed up in communal living situations, forging that rare band dynamic where arguments, jokes, and breakthroughs all took place within earshot of one another's instruments. Late-night jam sessions blurred into dawn, with Berry's bass lines frequently becoming the thread that held experimental ideas together. Tales from those days suggest that Berry was the one who insisted they keep pushing each jam beyond the edge, encouraging the group to explore new rhythms, new chord changes. He believed in capturing lightning in a bottle, an ethos that led to the next big leap in their career. That leap arrived in 1971 with the At Fillmore East live album. Recorded at the iconic New York venue, it became the band's breakout success, showcasing extended jams that soared and thundered in equal measure. Berry's role on tracks like Whipping Post and In Memory of Elizabeth Reed is impossible to ignore. His melodic runs became a signature element, something fans would hum along to as if it were a lead guitar line. The album catapulted the Allman Brothers Band into rock stardom. Suddenly, they were selling out venues, appearing in magazines, and recognized as standard bearers for a brand of American music that defied easy categorization. Yet stardom didn't come without growing pains. The rigors of constant touring and recording took a toll. Some nights, exhaustion overshadowed the camaraderie, and tensions brewed. By all accounts, Berry kept an even keel, gently stepping between flaring egos, reminding everyone that the music came first. Then in October 1971, tragedy struck. Duane Allman died in a motorcycle accident in Macon, Georgia, at just 24 years old. The entire band was devastated. Duane was not only the band's founder, but also Berry's closest friend. They had shared countless jam sessions, forging an artistic bond that transcended normal band chemistry. Berry reportedly fell silent for days after the news. In a private letter discovered years later, Berry confessed he felt a kind of guilt, as if he should have been there to prevent it somehow. The band debated whether to carry on. Greg was nearly inconsolable, and the loss of Duane's vision threatened to fracture everything they had built. Still, they chose to continue, partially in tribute to Duane, partially because the music felt like their only lifeline out of that grief. Berry poured his sorrow into his bass lines, imbuing them with a gravity that listeners sensed immediately. Their next album, Eat a Peach, released in 1972, was a testament to both the band's resilience and the hole Duane's absence left behind. Berry's playing, especially on tracks partially recorded before Duane's death, throbs with an undercurrent of mourning. While the record soared in sales, the band's personal lives took chaotic turns. Some members sought solace in substances, others buried themselves in relentless touring, trying to outrun grief. Berry found himself grappling with nightmares of that winding Macon road where Duane had crashed. He once confided in a close friend that every time he heard the roar of a motorcycle engine, his heart clenched in fear. Yet Macon was their home base, a place where they'd planted their creative roots. Berry tried to keep his personal dread locked away, dedicating himself to the band's success. Fans at live shows, unaware of the emotional turmoil, saw a group forging legendary performances night after night, with Berry stepping forward more often, filling some of the void Duane left behind. Then came November 11th, 1972. Only about a year after Duane's fatal accident, Berry Oakley was riding his own motorcycle in Macon, ironically near the same intersection, just a few blocks away from where Duane had died. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances, but most agree that Berry collided with a city bus. He was thrown from the bike, hitting his head. Witnesses later said he seemed dazed but not fatally injured. At one point, he reportedly refused immediate medical attention, insisting he was fine and wanted to go home. That decision would prove catastrophic. Hours later, he deteriorated rapidly, likely from internal bleeding related to a skull fracture. By the time he was rushed to the hospital, it was too late. Berry Oakley died in surgery, just 24 years old, the same age as Duane Allman at the time of his death. News of Berry's accident sent shockwaves through the band and their fan base. Few could believe that fate could be so cruel, claiming two foundational members in such a tragically similar way, and at almost the exact same location. Rumors circulated that Berry had been distraught, that maybe the Allman curse was more than just a spooked whisper among fans. The reality was that Berry, for all his introspective calm, carried immense grief over Duane's death. Friends speculated he was never fully present after losing his closest musical partner. He had taken to riding his motorcycle more recklessly, perhaps unconsciously dancing with the same danger that claimed Duane. Whether that's true or just rumor, the eerie parallels between the crashes ignited the notion of a curse that still follows the band's lore decades later. In the immediate aftermath, the Allman Brothers Band found themselves grappling with a second colossal loss. Greg, who had already lost his older brother, now had to watch another dear friend disappear. Dickie Betts, who had stepped up as a primary guitarist after Duane's passing, was plunged into another storm of grief. The band had to decide once again whether to soldier on or close this chapter forever. Ultimately, they brought in new blood, bassist Lamar Williams, to keep the music alive. But the spirit of the Allman Brothers Band was forever changed. You can hear it in their next records. A deeper sorrow, a weight behind the notes, a sense that they were playing in the long shadow of two ghosts. Across interviews and autobiographies, band members and their friends have wrestled with the question of whether some kind of dark luck hounded them. Greg Allman wrote in his memoir about an unshakable feeling that the band had offended fate, referencing the tragedies as evidence of forces beyond logic. Others dismissed that notion as superstition, pointing out that both Duane and Berry were daring personalities who loved the freedom of motorcycles. So perhaps tragedy was a grim possibility lurking from day one. Still, the close timing and the uncanny similarity of the accidents created a fertile ground for whispers of a curse. People started saying that the Allman Brothers had tapped too deeply into the haunted roots of Southern blues, stirring up restless spirits that demanded a toll. It was romantic folklore, perhaps, but it echoed the devastation felt by fans who found it impossible to believe these losses were mere coincidences. The band found themselves under a microscope. Journalists probed them about the tragedies, often overshadowing the music itself. Some speculated that the drug-fueled culture of the road played a role, though Berry was never known for extreme excess compared to certain other rock figures of the era. Others pointed to the band's grueling schedule, which left them frazzled and more prone to risky behavior in their downtime. Internally, the members struggled with guilt. Why did it have to be Duane and then Berry? Why not them? These complicated feelings fueled the group's raw, emotionally charged performances. On stage, Greg would sometimes break into tears during certain songs, his voice trembling under the weight of memory. Dickie, who once appeared so stoic, performed with a fervor that bordered on desperation, as if channeling the ghosts of his fallen friends. But as the years passed, those same losses hardened the band's resolve, giving them a depth that resonated with listeners dealing with their own hardships and heartbreak. One detail rarely mentioned came from a roadie who shared in a small documentary interview that Berry had scribbled in a journal just weeks before his death. "Every time I ride, I feel Duane is with me. Sometimes I look over my shoulder and swear I see him urging me on." Whether that was a literal belief or a metaphor for how Berry carried Duane's spirit is unclear, but it hints at an emotional bond that Berry simply couldn't shake, a bond that might have played a role in the recklessness culminating in that fatal collision. Some fans fixate on that journal entry as proof Berry was courting the same fate, consciously or otherwise. In the swirl of tragedy, the band's immediate priority was to preserve the music they had created with Berry and Duane. Berry was buried next to Duane at Macon's Rose Hill Cemetery, a resting place that soon became a pilgrimage site for fans. Even now, decades later, visitors leave guitars, picks, and handwritten letters at their graves. The faithful come to pay respects and wrestle with the heartbreak that these two men, so full of promise, died so young. For many, it serves as a poignant reminder that the ephemeral magic of the Allman Brothers sound was forged in the fires of real loss. The idea that a curse might have overshadowed them continues to color those visits, with some fans whispering that they can sense a strange energy at the site. Others simply weep at the stark reminder of life's fragility. In the broader history of rock, the deaths of Duane Allman and Berry Oakley represent a turning point for the Allman Brothers Band. When they returned to the studio and stage, they had to reinvent themselves, forging new musical directions, while keeping the soulful, blues-infused heart that had made them famous. Lamar Williams took over on bass, and while he was a talented player in his own right, the memory of Berry's melodic runs lingered, haunting every performance of classic songs. The Allmans overcame personal conflicts, internal feuds, substance abuse crises, and label pressures in the years that followed. Yet the specter of those early days never vanished. Greg Allman especially was hounded by the sense that the band's fate had been irrevocably altered, that Duane and Berry had been the guiding lights. They'd try to recapture that flame in marathon live shows, sometimes succeeding in igniting a spark reminiscent of the Fillmore days. But the unspoken presence of those missing members hung in the air. Controversies flared too. Some critics argued that the Allman Brothers should have ended the band after Berry's death, contending that carrying on felt disrespectful to the original lineup's legacy. Others countered that the only way to honor Berry and Duane was to keep playing, to continue the musical mission they started. Tensions arose among surviving members, partly fueled by the stress of living up to the band's own legend. Over time, Greg Allman's personal struggles with addiction and the departures and returns of various members muddled the band's trajectory. Through it all, fans remained fiercely loyal, cherishing the memory of Dwayne and Berry as integral to the Allman Brothers mythology. As time went on, more tragedies befell the Allman Brothers family. Greg Allman battled serious health problems before his own death in 2017. Butch Trucks died by suicide that same year, shocking fans once again. In each instance, the idea of a curse resurged in conversation. Fans found themselves revisiting the band's long history of loss, tracing a lineage of pain that began so starkly with Dwayne and Berry. Yet overshadowing all that darkness is a legacy of resilience and artistry that has inspired countless musicians and fans to persevere in the face of heartbreak. For many, the Allman Brothers Band, with all its tragedies, stands as living proof that music can provide a form of salvation, even if it can't fully ward off cruel twists of fate. For those who travel to Macon today, a quiet walk through Rose Hill Cemetery brings forth many emotions. Standing before the graves of Berry Oakley and Dwayne Allman, some visitors report a strange mixture of peace and sadness. They often leave behind token tributes, plectrums, notes, flowers, sometimes a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The hush of that place, broken only by the rustle of leaves in a light wind, has an almost a sacred quality. One can't help but reflect on how fleeting life is, how brilliance can vanish, and how deeply music can fuse souls in ways that even death can't completely sever. In the silence, you can almost hear the ghostly echoes of a jam. Dwayne's slide guitar gently crying out, Berry's bass weaving around it in a slow, mournful dance. Ultimately, Berry Oakley's story doesn't need any grand mythology to be impactful. It's a human tale of a talented young man who found a sense of purpose in music, who formed a brotherhood with like-minded souls, who soared to the heights of artistic achievement, and then, in one moment of tragic misfortune, was gone. The Allman Curse is a narrative device that tries to explain the unexplainable, but it can't fully capture the complexity of human lives cut short. Berry's demise reminds us of the fine line between glory and disaster, of how random an endpoint can be, and of the potent mix of sorrow and inspiration that an artist's passing can bestow upon those left behind. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.